You wake up at 35 and suddenly realize you've spent 15 years doing something that doesn't matter. Maybe it's the career your parents chose for you. Maybe it's the relationship you stayed in out of comfort. Maybe it's the endless scroll of social media that promises fulfillment but delivers emptiness. By then, it's too late to rebuild. The best years are gone. But what if I told you that Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, left us a roadmap to prevent exactly this? A blueprint that doesn't require you to quit everything tomorrow, but rather to understand the one thing most people miss about their own lives. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into Carl Jung's most practical wisdom about wasting your life, and more importantly, how to stop. This isn't motivational fluff. This is backed by decades of psychological research and real-world application. By the end of this video, you'll understand why you feel stuck and exactly how to break free. If you're someone who feels like you're living someone else's life, hit that subscribe button. Let's begin. Section 1. The Crisis of Meaning. Part A. Jung's Dark Discovery. Carl Jung lived from 1875 to 1961. If you know anything about him, you probably think of archetypes, the shadow self, or his split from Sigmund Freud. But here's what most people don't know. Jung had a personal crisis at around age 40. He'd achieved everything society told him to want. He was wealthy. He was famous. He was respected. He had a thriving practice in Zurich. By every external measure, he'd succeeded. And yet, he felt empty. He described it in his autobiography as hitting a wall. Not a wall of depression or mental illness, something subtler. It was a quiet realization that the life he'd built didn't belong to him. He'd been living according to a script written by everyone else. His culture, his family, his profession, his ego. This is crucial because Jung realized something most people never do. You can have everything and still have nothing if it's not authentically yours. He spent the next years from roughly 40 to 60, essentially losing his mind in the best possible way. He traveled to Africa. He had vivid dreams. He created thousands of drawings and paintings exploring his unconscious mind. He was ridiculed by his peers, but he was finding himself. What Jung discovered during this period became the foundation for understanding why so many of us waste our lives. Part B, the two halves of life. Jung identified something radical, that human life has two distinct halves, and they require completely different approaches. The first half of life, from birth to roughly 40, is about adaptation. It's about survival, establishing yourself in society, building security, gaining status, and achieving external goals. Your parents' values, your culture's expectations, your peers' pressures, these shape you during this phase, and that's normal. This is healthy. You need to learn social skills. You need to find financial security. You need to understand how the world works. But here's the trap. Most people never transition from the first half to the second half. They keep playing the game that worked in their 20s and 30s. They keep seeking external validation. They keep asking, what should I do? Instead of, what do I want to do? The second half of life is supposed to be completely different. It's about individuation, Jung's most important concept. It's about becoming who you actually are, not who you were told to be. But to get there, you have to face something terrifying. You have to face the gap between your actual self and your persona, the mask you've been wearing. And that gap for most people is enormous. Think about yourself for a moment. How much of what you believe is actually yours? How much comes from your parents, your religion, your culture, your social circle? If you're being honest with yourself, it's probably less than you'd like to admit. This is where the life wasting happens. Part C, why we waste our lives. Let me be clear about what wasting your life actually means according to Jung. It's not about not making enough money. It's not about not being famous or accomplished enough. It's not about failing by society's standards. Wasting your life in Jung's framework means living in the second half of life according to the rules of the first half. It means chasing other people's dreams. It means ignoring the whispers of your true self in pursuit of comfort and validation. It means reaching 60 and realizing you never actually asked yourself what you wanted. Here's the mechanism of how this happens. In childhood, you learn what gets you approval. Maybe it's being quiet and obedient. Maybe it's being the achiever. Maybe it's being the peacekeeper. Whatever earned you love and safety becomes your default strategy. You build a persona, a protective mask that works. This persona keeps you safe. It gets you jobs. It makes your parents proud. It fits into society. But here's what happens. You forget it's a mask. Decades later, you're following rules that made sense when you were 7, but don't serve you now. You're still trying to be what your third-grade teacher praised you for being. You're still avoiding what your father disapproved of. You're still seeking what your mother wanted for you. And the saddest part? Most people never even realize this is happening. They just feel a vague sense of dissatisfaction. They wonder why success feels hollow. They ask themselves, is this it? Is this really all there is? That's the waste, not the accomplishments themselves. The accomplishments that came at the cost of discovering yourself. Jung said this is almost universal. He estimated that 90% of people in the second half of life are living inauthentically. They're not living their lives. They're living lives that look good from the outside. Section 2, the cost of running on empty. Part A, the physical toll. Let's talk about what happens to your body and mind when you're wasting your life. Jung didn't have modern neuroscience, but he observed something profound. The body keeps score. When you're living inauthentically, when there's a constant gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be, your nervous system is in a state of chronic stress. It's not the acute stress of a bear chasing you. It's the low-level, never-ending stress of incongruence. Modern research backs this up. Studies show that people whose values don't align with their lifestyles have higher cortisol levels, higher blood pressure, more frequent illness, and accelerated aging. One famous study followed people for decades and found that those who felt their lives lacked purpose had a 27% higher risk of premature death than those who felt their lives were meaningful. Think about that. Wasting your life doesn't just feel bad. It actively kills you. But it gets worse. When you're living someone else's life, your immune system becomes dysregulated. Your sleep suffers. You get sick more often. You develop chronic pain. These aren't imaginary symptoms. They're your body's way of sending you a message. This isn't right. Jung called these symptoms the psychosomatic protest. Your body is literally protesting against the betrayal of your own nature. Many people spend decades treating the symptoms, taking antacids, sleeping pills, painkillers, even psychiatric medication, without ever addressing the root cause. They're living a life that isn't theirs. This is one of the most insidious costs of wasting your life. It's slow, it's quiet, but it's relentless. Part B, the psychological burden. Then there's the psychological cost. When you're not living authentically, you develop what Jung called the shadow. This is the part of you that you've rejected, denied, or hidden away. It contains all the desires, values, and aspects of yourself that you decided weren't acceptable. But here's the thing about the shadow. It doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. Instead, it grows. It accumulates power. And eventually, it starts to leak out in destructive ways. Maybe you've rejected your creativity because your family valued practical careers. The shadow doesn't forget. Years later, you're jealous and bitter when you see others pursuing creative work. You sabotage their success, or you find yourself filled with rage at seemingly minor things because the minor thing reminded you of something you've been repressing. Maybe you've denied your need for solitude and deep work because your culture values constant social connection. The shadow makes you anxious and depressed. You develop social anxiety even though you're forcing yourself to be social. You feel exhausted by your own life. Maybe you've pushed down your sexuality, your ambition, your anger, or your vulnerability. The shadow manifests as unexplained anxiety, depression, or compulsive behaviors. You find yourself eating too much, drinking too much, working too much, anything to numb the discomfort of being yourself while pretending to be someone else. Jung said that most neurosis in adults comes from this split between the conscious persona and the unconscious shadow. We're not depressed because life is hard. We're depressed because we're at war with ourselves. And the tragedy is we're usually not aware of this war. We just feel unhappy and we don't know why. Part C, the relational damage. Here's something that hits even harder. When you're living inauthentically, you can't have genuine relationships. Think about the people in your life. When you're around them, are you actually you? Or are you the version of you that you think they want? Most people are the second version. You've probably noticed this yourself. You act differently around your boss than your best friend. You act differently around your parents than your partner. We all do this to some degree. But here's Jung's insight. When the gap between these different versions becomes too large, when the authentic you is always hidden, real intimacy becomes impossible. Intimacy requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires showing up as yourself. But if you've buried your authentic self so deep that you've forgotten what it is, how can anyone truly know you? The result is profound loneliness even in the midst of relationships. You might be married, surrounded by friends, embedded in a close family, and still feel utterly alone. Because nobody really knows you. They know your persona. And here's where it gets darker. Sometimes we unconsciously choose partners who will help us maintain our false life. We're attracted to people who want us to stay exactly as we are, not because they love us, but because they benefit from our inauthenticity. A person who needs to feel needed might partner with someone who stays helpless. A person who denied their own creativity might partner with a practical person who will validate that denial. A person running from their sexuality might partner with someone judgmental to reinforce the repression. Jung called this the unlived life in the partner. We unconsciously delegate parts of ourselves to other people. Then we resent them for not being who we wanted them to be, when really we're resenting them for being the repository of our denied selves. The relationships that form around inauthenticity are fragile. They're vulnerable to collapse once the gap becomes too obvious. Or worse, they persist as shells, two people coexisting but never truly connecting. Section 3. The illusion of later. Part A. The postponement trap. One of the most dangerous patterns Jung observed was something I call the illusion of later. It works like this. You tell yourself, once I get the promotion, then I'll pursue what I actually want. Or, once the kids are grown, then I'll travel. Or, once I have enough money, then I'll take the risk. This sounds reasonable. It sounds responsible even. But here's what actually happens. You get the promotion. A new but emerges. You get the money. New responsibilities appear. The kids grow up. New obligations take their place. There's always a reason why now isn't the right time. This isn't an accident. This is how the ego protects itself. Once you've built a persona, a false self that works, your ego has a vested interest in maintaining it. Even if you're unhappy, at least you're safe. At least you know the rules. Change threatens that safety. So the ego creates an endless stream of reasons why change has to wait. Jung had a patient, and this is a true story. A woman who spent 30 years telling herself she'd pursue her art once she retired. She was a school teacher. She never painted during those 30 years. She just endured her days waiting for retirement. When retirement came, she had a stroke. She died before she ever painted a single canvas. I'm not telling you this to depress you. I'm telling you this because Jung was trying to shock people awake. He wanted people to understand that there's no guarantee of later. Life doesn't owe you a second act. More importantly, the longer you wait, the deeper the persona becomes embedded. It's not just habit anymore. It's calcified. It's identity. After 30 years of being the responsible one, can you even imagine being anything else? Jung said that people often experience a psychological crisis around midlife, precisely because, on some level, they know time is running out. They can feel the window closing, and they haven't been living. Some people have a midlife crisis that's destructive, sudden affairs, quitting abruptly, destructive behavior. Jung understood this as a desperate, unskilled attempt at individuation. The psyche is trying to shatter the false self so something real can emerge. But it doesn't have to be a crisis. It can be a conscious choice. Part B, the compounding interest of wasted time. Let me show you something that'll genuinely shock you. Time doesn't feel linear. When you're 20, a year is 5% of your entire life. When you're 80, a year is 1.25% of your life. This means that subjectively, time actually speeds up as you age. But here's the bigger problem, the compounding effect of wasted time. Let's say you're 25 and considering a career change. You're terrified. You tell yourself, I'll do it in a year. I'll get one more promotion first. You do it in a year. And suddenly it's a year later. It's now harder to change because you've advanced further in the current career. So you tell yourself, I'll do it in 2 years, and so on. Before you know it, it's been 10 years. You're now 35. You have a mortgage tied to your income. You might have a family depending on your salary. A partner who chose you based partly on your income stability. Changing now doesn't just require courage. It requires disrupting multiple people's lives. So you wait another 10 years. Now it's been 20 years. You're 45. Almost half your life is gone. You've climbed high in a career you never wanted. You've built a life that requires the salary from this career. You're trapped. This is the compounding effect of inauthenticity. Each year you wait isn't just 1 year lost. It's 1 year that makes the next year harder. It's 1 year that makes the persona more real, more defended, more integrated into your identity. Jung understood this. He said that people often wait until they're literally forced to change by illness, by loss, by a relationship ending, because the cost of voluntary change seems too high. But here's what they don't realize. The cost of not changing isn't zero. It's compounding. And unlike financial debt, you can't declare bankruptcy on existential debt. You can't refinance a life. Part C, the deathbed perspective. Jung had a powerful practice. Whenever someone came to him stuck in this pattern, he'd ask them to imagine their deathbed. Not in a morbid way, but genuinely. Imagine yourself at 80 or 90 years old at the end. Imagine looking back on your entire life. What will you regret? Most people, when they do this exercise honestly, don't regret what they tried and failed at. They regret what they never tried. They regret the dreams they abandoned. They regret the self they never became. More specifically, they regret staying comfortable. They regret choosing safety over authenticity. They regret living for other people's approval. No one on their deathbed says, I wish I'd spent more time pleasing my parents. No one says, I wish I'd pursued the career that looked good at cocktail parties instead of the work that made me come alive. No one says, I'm so glad I never took any risks. Yet this is how most people are living. Jung believed that the deathbed perspective isn't morbid. It's clarifying. It cuts through all the noise. It shows you what actually matters versus what only seems to matter from within the fog of everyday life. Here's the radical move. Start making decisions now as if you're looking backward from your deathbed. Not someday. Not after the promotion. Not when conditions are perfect. Now. This is what separates people who waste their lives from people who live them. It's not that the second group has more time. It's not that they're luckier or more talented. It's that they made this shift. They started using the deathbed perspective before it was too late. And paradoxically, this doesn't make them irresponsible. It makes them more responsible to themselves. Section 4. The Shadow Self. Part A. What is the shadow? Before we talk about how to stop wasting your life, we need to understand one of Jung's most important concepts, the shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's not the dark side of you that you need to defeat. This is a massive misunderstanding. Jung was very clear about this, but it got lost in translation and popular culture. The shadow is simply the part of you that you've rejected. When you're a child, you're naturally multifaceted. You have curiosity and caution. You have ambition and contentment. You have sexuality and innocence. You have anger and compassion. You have selfishness and generosity. All of these are natural, normal aspects of a human being. But then something happens. Maybe your teacher tells you you're too talkative. Maybe your parents reward you for being the good child and punish you for being assertive. Maybe your religion teaches that certain desires are sinful. Maybe your culture values certain traits and condemns others. So you make a choice, usually unconsciously. You decide, that part of me isn't acceptable. I'm going to hide it. The part you hide doesn't disappear. It goes into the shadow. So maybe you're naturally ambitious, but your family values humble modesty. You push the ambition into the shadow. Now you have a conscious self that's humble and non-threatening. And you have an unconscious shadow that's burning with ambition. Or you're naturally sensitive and emotional, but your family values stoicism and logic. The sensitivity goes into the shadow. The conscious self is rational and unflappable. The shadow seethes with unexpressed feelings. Or you're naturally sexual, but your religion teaches that sexuality is sinful. The sexuality gets repressed into the shadow. The conscious self is pure and asexual. The shadow is obsessed with the very thing you're denying. This is the split that Jung said causes neurosis. Part B, how the shadow shows up. Here's how to recognize when you're living with a repressed shadow. First, through projection. This is where it gets interesting. You'll intensely dislike someone for a quality that they possess, but it's actually your quality that you've disowned. They're just triggering it in you. For example, a woman who's repressed her ambition might be intensely critical of ambitious women. She calls them ruthless or unfeminine. She judges them harshly. But what she's actually doing is judging the part of herself that wants to be ambitious. Or a man who's been taught that vulnerability, his weakness, might be contemptuous of emotional men. He judges them as weak, pathetic. But he's actually projecting his own repressed vulnerability onto them. We project onto others because it's safer than admitting these qualities exist in us. Second, the shadow shows up through compulsive behavior. Remember, the shadow doesn't disappear just because you're ignoring it. It gathers energy. So if you've repressed your sexuality, you might find yourself compulsively consuming sexual content. Or if you've repressed your anger, you might find yourself snapping at people over tiny things. Or if you've repressed your need for pleasure and joy, you might find yourself compulsively pursuing thrills or substances. The behavior feels like it comes out of nowhere. You can't explain why you keep doing it, but it's the shadow trying to express itself. Third, the shadow shows up in your dreams. Jung believed that dreams were one of the primary languages of the shadow. In dreams, you're not consciously censoring yourself, so the shadow content can emerge. If you're having recurring nightmares about being chased, it might be a shadow aspect that you're running from in waking life. If you're having dreams about violence, sex, or betrayal, the shadow is trying to communicate something. Jung would say, don't be afraid of your dreams. They're not predictions. They're messages from the rejected part of yourself. Fourth, the shadow shows up in relationships. You'll notice that you're intensely attracted to certain people. Often these people have qualities that you've repressed in yourself. They become a sort of screen onto which you project your shadow. In the beginning, it feels like falling in love. You're fascinated by them. They seem so alive, so free, so something that you're not. You want to merge with them. You want to become them. But this isn't real love. This is shadow projection. And it's a disaster waiting to happen. Because eventually, you'll resent them for having the very qualities you were attracted to. You'll try to get them to suppress those qualities, to become more like your conscious persona. You'll punish them for embodying what you've disowned in yourself. This is why so many relationships fail. Both people are trying to keep their shadow projected onto the other person. And the moment either person tries to reclaim their own shadow, to integrate that denied part of themselves, the whole dynamic falls apart. Fifth, the shadow shows up as addiction and compulsion. The shadow has energy. It wants expression. If you deny it a direct path to consciousness, it will find indirect paths. So if you've been taught that pleasure is sinful, you might become addicted to overeating, shopping, or substance. Use ways to get pleasure while maintaining the fiction that you don't actually want pleasure. Or if you've repressed anger, you might become addicted to violent content or competitive activities that let you express anger in a socially sanctioned way. Or if you've repressed your sexuality, you might compulsively pursue sexual experiences in ways that are self-destructive. Jung said that addictions are rarely about the substance or behavior itself. They're about the shadow trying to break through. Part C, integration, not elimination. Here's the crucial shift that most people miss. You don't get well by eliminating the shadow. You get well by integrating it. This is so important. Let me say it again. The goal is not to destroy your shadow. It's to bring it into consciousness and integrate it. The parts of you that you've rejected, they're not evil. They're not dangerous. They're just parts of you that you've deemed unacceptable, usually because of messages you received when you were too young to think for yourself. When you integrate the shadow, those rejected parts don't control you. They become available to you as options. Let's say you've repressed your assertiveness because your family valued compliance. The shadow version of assertiveness might be aggressive, hostile, dominating. But the integrated version? It's healthy boundaries. It's the ability to advocate for yourself. It's the capacity to say no. Or let's say you've repressed your sensuality because your religion taught that the body is sinful. The shadow version might be sexual obsession or compulsivity. But the integrated version? It's the ability to enjoy your body, to be present in your senses, to experience pleasure. Or let's say you've repressed your need for solitude because your culture values constant social connection. The shadow version might be social anxiety or misanthropy. But the integrated version? It's healthy boundaries around your time, the ability to do deep work, the capacity to be alone without being lonely. Integration is how you become whole. And here's the irony. Once you integrate your shadow, you become more capable, not less. The assertive person is better equipped to handle conflict. The sensual person is better equipped for intimate relationships. The person comfortable with solitude is better equipped for creativity and deep work. Jung said that people often fear integrating their shadow because they think they'll become worse versions of themselves. They think, if I stop denying my anger, I'll become violent. If I stop denying my sexuality, I'll become promiscuous. If I stop denying my ambition, I'll become ruthless. But this is backward. It's the denied shadow that's dangerous. It's the repressed anger that explodes inappropriately. It's the repressed sexuality that manifests as obsession. It's the repressed ambition that manifests as sabotage. The conscious, integrated version of any quality is actually more controllable, more choosable, more maturely expressed. This is how you move from wasting your life to living it. You stop expending all your energy on denial and repression. You reclaim your wholeness, and suddenly you have agency. You have choice. You have aliveness. This is the second half of Jung's life journey. First half, build a persona that works in society. Second half, integrate the shadow so you can become yourself. Section 5, the path to individuation. The ultimate goal in Jung's framework is something called individuation. This word gets thrown around a lot, and it's often confused with individualism. They're not the same thing. Individualism is about asserting yourself against the collective. It's rebellion. It's me first thinking. It's important at certain times, but it can also be selfish and immature. Individuation is different. It's the process of becoming who you actually are. It's not about being different from others. It's about being authentically yourself. And paradoxically, true individuation requires engaging deeply with the collective, with culture, tradition, society, so that you can consciously choose which parts to accept and which parts to reject. Here's how Jung described it. Individuation is the process of becoming the unique individual that you were meant to become, while simultaneously becoming more connected to the collective human experience. When you individuate, you're not becoming more isolated. You're becoming more fully human, which means you can connect with others more authentically. Think of it like learning a language. When you're first learning a language, you follow rigid rules. You conjugate verbs mechanically. You follow grammar perfectly. You sound robotic. But the goal isn't to forever follow rules rigidly. The goal is to master the rules so deeply that you can break them creatively. A poet doesn't just follow grammar. They bend it, break it, create with it. That's individuation. You master the rules of your culture and family. You understand them deeply. Then you consciously choose which ones serve you and which ones don't. Then you create something authentically yours. Individuation isn't a destination. It's a lifelong process. It's not something you complete and then you're done. It's something you move toward with increasing consciousness. Part B, the stages of individuation. Jung identified several stages in the individuation process. Understanding these stages helps you understand where you might be and what comes next. Stage 1, unconscious identification with the persona. This is where most of us start. You're completely identified with your mask. You are your job title, You are your role in your family. You are the good child or the problem child or the successful one or the struggling one. You don't even realize it's a persona. It feels like your identity. Most people spend their entire lives here. They never question it. They live and die having never asked themselves, who am I beneath all this? Stage 2. Recognition of the persona. This is when a crack appears. You start to notice, wait, I'm acting differently with different people. Or, this job that I thought defined me feels empty. Or, I'm achieving the things I was supposed to achieve, but it doesn't feel right. This is uncomfortable. Your first instinct is usually to push this realization away. But if you stay with it, you move into stage 3. Stage 3, confrontation with the shadow. Now you start to see the parts of yourself you've been denying. You notice the projection. You notice the compulsive behaviors. You have dreams. You feel emotions that don't fit your persona. This is actually a critical period. This is when many people panic and either seek therapy, which is good, or self-destruct, which is destructive. The key is to not identify with the shadow either. You're not the repressed anger. You're the person who's discovering the repressed anger. You're not the forbidden desire. You're the person who's discovering the forbidden desire. Some people get stuck here, thinking that acknowledging the shadow is the same as acting it out. They think, I've discovered my anger, so now I have to express it destructively. But that's a misunderstanding. Stage 4, integration of shadow. This is when you stop identifying with either the persona or the shadow. You see them both as parts of a larger self. You start to say, yes, I have the capacity for anger, and I also have the capacity for compassion. I get to choose which one to express? This is where real freedom begins. It's not freedom from the persona. The persona is still useful. It's freedom from compulsive identification with the persona. You're using it, not being used by it. Stage 5. Confrontation with the anima animus. For men, there's a contrasexual aspect of the self called the anima, the feminine principle. For women, it's the animus, the masculine principle. What this means is that men have repressed feminine qualities, intuition, receptivity, collaboration, and women have repressed masculine qualities, aggression, independence, assertion. Most men are terrified of their anima. They've been taught that being feminine is weak, so they project it onto women, then judge women for having the very qualities they've disowned. Similarly, most women are terrified of their animus. They've been taught that being masculine is unfeminine, so they project it onto men, then resent men for being stronger than them. If you want to individuate, you have to integrate these aspects too. Stage 6, confrontation with the self. This is Jung's highest stage. It's when you realize that there's something larger than your individual ego. Some people call this God. Some call it the collective unconscious. Some call it meaning or purpose. But it's the realization that you're not just an isolated individual. You're part of something larger. For most people, this stage doesn't arrive until midlife or later, and it requires integrating all the previous stages. Part C, how to begin your own individuation. Okay, so how do you actually start this process? Here are the concrete steps. Step 1, examine your persona. Start noticing, who are you with different people? How do you act around your boss versus your parents versus your friends? Where do you perform the most? Where do you feel the most authentic? Jung had a practice. Write down the person you think you are. Your job title, your role in your family, your reputation. Really describe it. Get detailed. Now ask yourself, is this actually me, or is this the character I've been playing? Be honest, most of it is the character. Step 2, notice your projections. Think about the people you really dislike, the ones you judge harshly. What qualities do they have that bother you? Now ask yourself honestly, do I have this quality, but I'm denying it in myself? For example, if you really dislike selfish people, is it possible you've repressed your own healthy self-interest? If you really dislike emotional people, is it possible you've repressed your own emotions? This is hard work because it requires admitting that the qualities you judge in others exist in you too. But this is how you stop projecting and start reclaiming. Step 3. Work with your dreams. Jung said dreams are messages from the unconscious. Start keeping a dream journal. Write down your dreams immediately after waking up before they fade. Don't try to interpret them logically. Just notice. What emotions did you feel? What kept repeating? What characters or symbols appeared? Over time, patterns will emerge. These patterns are your shadow trying to communicate. Step 4. Identify what you've denied. Think back to your childhood. What were you praised for? What were you punished for? What made your parents proud? What made them disappointed? The things you were praised for became your persona. The things you were punished for went into your shadow. Now ask, do I want to keep living according to these old reward-punishment patterns? Or do I want to reclaim what I denied? Step 5. Make small choices differently. You don't have to blow up your life overnight. You start small. If you've always been the responsible one, maybe you take a day off without guilt. If you've always been the quiet listener, maybe you share your opinion. If you've always been the strong one, maybe you ask for help. These small acts of authenticity are revolutionary. They begin to crack the persona. They signal to your psyche that it's safe to be more of yourself. Step 6. Find your people. You cannot individuate alone. You need people who will support your authentic self, not your persona. This might mean leaving relationships. It might mean finding new friends, a different community, or a therapist who understands this work. The people who benefit from your inauthenticity will often resist your change. They'll tell you you're being selfish, irresponsible, or crazy. That's because your change threatens their sense of stability. But you need people who will say, I support you becoming yourself, even if it's different from who you were. Step 7. Get professional help. Jung was a psychologist. He believed that serious individuation work benefits from having a guide. This could be a Jungian analyst, a therapist, a coach, or a mentor. Someone who can help you navigate the shadow material without getting lost in it. Someone who can support you through the discomfort. Don't try to do this entirely alone. The psyche has its own intelligence, but it helps to have a companion on the journey. Section 6. Practical application for your life. Part A. In your career. Let's get concrete. Let's talk about how this applies to your actual life, starting with work. Many people are in careers they hate because someone else chose it for them. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it was financial pressure. Maybe it was the path of least resistance. You might be good at your job. You might even be successful, but you wake up miserable. This is classic persona work without shadow integration. You built a professional identity that works, that gets you money and status, but it doesn't belong to you. The question isn't, should I quit today? The question is this aligned with who I actually am? If the answer is no, here's what Jung-influenced work looks like. First, you acknowledge it. You stop pretending it's fine. You sit with the discomfort of that truth. Second, you explore what would be aligned. What did you love as a kid before you learned to be practical? What makes you lose track of time? What would you do if money wasn't a factor? These aren't frivolous questions. They're pointing you toward your authentic self. Third, you start small. You don't have to quit tomorrow, but you start taking steps. You take a class. You volunteer. You start a side project. You explore. Fourth, you build a plan. How could you transition? What skills do you need? How much money do you need to make the change? What's the realistic timeline? Fifth, you deal with the resistance, both external and internal. Your family might say you're being irresponsible. Your partner might worry about finances. Your ego might say you're too old to change. You acknowledge all of this, and you don't let any of it stop you. Sixth, you make the move. This doesn't mean you have to become a starving artist. It means you align your work with your values. You might make less money, but you'll have something more valuable, a life that's actually yours. Here's what's interesting. People who make this transition, even if they make less money, consistently report higher satisfaction, better health, and stronger relationships. The external loss is offset by the internal gain. Part B, in your relationships, 47, 30, 50 brow. Honest, challenging. This is probably the hardest area. Your relationships were formed based on you being a certain persona. Your partner chose you based partly on who you were pretending to be. Your family knows you as the role you've played. When you start to individuate, when you start to become more authentically yourself, it disrupts everything. Some relationships can evolve with you. Your partner or loved ones can say, "I want to support the real you even if it's different." These relationships actually deepen because they become based on authentic connection. But some relationships are built on the unconscious agreement that you'll both stay in your personas. You'll both keep playing the roles that keep you safe. When you start to change, it threatens that agreement, and the other person might fight hard to keep you in your old role. This is heartbreaking, but it's also clarifying. In the context of individuation, Jung would say, do not stay small to keep someone else comfortable. This doesn't mean you're being selfish. It means you're being authentic. And authenticity is essential for real intimacy. If someone loves you, they should want you to be real. If they fight your authenticity, that's information about the relationship. Sometimes relationships that seem stable are actually based on mutual inauthenticity. You're both playing roles that feel safe. The moment either person wants to be real, the whole thing threatens to collapse. This is hard. But it's better to discover this now than at 60 when you've spent 30 years with someone who never knew the real you. Here's what Jung would recommend. 1. Have the conversation. Tell your partner or family member what you're discovering. Tell them you're trying to become more authentic. Give them a chance to come with you. 2. Be patient with their resistance. They're not bad people. They're just scared. Change is scary. Loss of control is scary. 3. Set boundaries. You can be compassionate and still not compromise your authenticity. You can say, I understand this is hard for you and I'm still doing this. 4. If they can't evolve with you, you might have to make a choice. Do you keep yourself small to preserve the relationship? Or do you grow and risk losing the relationship? There's no formula here, but I'll tell you what Jung would say. The relationships worth preserving are the ones where you can be yourself. Part C, Navigating the Midlife Crisis Consciously. We've talked about the midlife crisis, that jarring realization that hits around 40 or 50 that you've wasted decades. What Jung discovered is that this crisis is actually healthy. It's your psyche trying to wake you up. It's the individuating self trying to break through the calcified persona. The problem is most people experience it as a crisis. They panic. They make reactive choices. They have affairs or quit their jobs impulsively without thinking it through. But you can navigate it consciously. Here's how. First, see it as information, not catastrophe. The depression, the anxiety, the restlessness, these aren't signs that you're broken. They're signs that you're waking up. Your psyche is saying, this isn't working. We need to change. Honor that message instead of medicating it away. Note, if you're in genuine depression that's keeping you from functioning, please get professional help. But if you're functioning and just deeply unsatisfied, sit with it. Second, resist the destructive impulse. The classic midlife crisis looks like affair, sports car, dramatic life change made in emotional reactivity. These aren't wrong because they involve change. They're wrong because they're unconscious. You're still not owning your choices. You're acting out of desperation instead of intention. Instead, make conscious choices. You might still change jobs. You might still shift in your relationship, but you do it from awareness, not reactivity. Third, do the psychological work. This is where therapy or deep introspection comes in. You need to understand why you're unsatisfied. Is it because your job doesn't align with your values? Is it because your relationship isn't authentic? Is it because you've ignored your shadow for 40 years? Once you understand the root, you can make targeted changes instead of wholesale destruction. Fourth, accept the loss. Individuation always involves loss. You're losing the version of yourself you've been pretending to be. You're losing the life that looked good from the outside. You might be losing relationships, status, or financial security. Grieve this. Don't pretend it's all positive. Loss is real. But also know what you're gaining is infinitely more valuable. You're gaining yourself. Fifth, understand that it's never too late. The ideal time to start individuation is in your 20s or 30s. But Jung worked with people in their 50s, 60s, 70s who were doing this work. It's harder the later you start. The persona is more entrenched. There's less time. The stakes might be higher because you have more to lose, but it's not impossible. Consciousness can emerge at any time. One of Jung's most famous cases was a man in his 60s who came to him deeply depressed. He'd been successful his entire life, but it meant nothing. Through therapy, he found that his actual passion was art. He was already 60, so he wouldn't become famous. But in his remaining years, he painted. He said it was the first time he felt truly alive. That's individuation, not becoming rich or famous, becoming alive. Section 7, Addressing Common Objections. Part A, but I have responsibilities. I know. You have a mortgage. You have kids. You have a spouse who depends on your income. You have aging parents. You have obligations. Jung acknowledges this. He's not saying to blow up your life and to hell with everyone else. What he's saying is, there's a difference between mature responsibility and self-abandonment. Mature responsibility means, I'm going to honor my commitments and I'm going to work toward authenticity. The person who says, I can't change careers because of my mortgage is telling a story. The truth is, you could change careers, but it would require sacrifice. It would be harder. It would mean making less money or adjusting your lifestyle. Sometimes that's worth it. Sometimes it's not. But don't pretend you have no choice. You do have a choice. You're just choosing security over authenticity. That's valid. But it's a choice, not an inevitability. The people who successfully individuate while maintaining responsibilities do it by being intentional. They might take a lower-paying job in a field they love. They might negotiate a career change gradually. They might pursue their authenticity part-time while maintaining financial stability. It takes more creativity and patience than just blowing everything up. But it's doable. And here's what Jung would tell you. Your kids don't need you to sacrifice your soul for them. They need you to model authenticity. They need to see their parent being genuine, taking risks, becoming more fully themselves. That's worth more than financial security. That's actually the greatest gift you can give them. Part B. What if I'm too old? You're not too old. But I'll be honest, it's harder the older you get. When you're 25, changing careers is a setback. When you're 55, it feels like catastrophe. When you're 30 and you leave a relationship, there's a sense that you'll find another. When you're 55, the fear is that you'll die alone. The ego's resistance gets louder. The practical obstacles get bigger. The time pressure gets more real. But Jung worked with people in every stage of life. And he believed that consciousness, authenticity, and individuation are always worth pursuing. Here's the reality. You're going to use the same amount of time whether you spend it becoming more authentic or not. Time is going to pass. You might as well spend it living a life that's actually yours. If you're 55 and you change careers, you might have 30 years in this new field. That's still a meaningful amount of time. If you spend that time doing something that matters to you, rather than something that doesn't, that changes everything. And if you don't make the change and you're 85, you'll have spent 30 years wishing you had, which is worse. Besides, some of the most important work of individuation happens in the second and third stages of life. Younger people are still sorting out the persona. Older people have the experience, wisdom, and perspective to do the deeper work of shadow integration and self-realization. You're not too old. You're potentially at the perfect time. Part C, but what if I'm wrong? What if you make a change and it doesn't work out? This is the fear that keeps most people paralyzed. Jung's answer, that's possible. You might change careers and hate it. You might leave a relationship and regret it. You might pursue a dream and fail. But here's what's also true. You might change careers and love it. You might leave a relationship and find one that's authentic. You might pursue a dream and succeed. The only way to avoid the possibility of being wrong is to never make a choice. And that choice, to never choose, is actually choosing something. It's choosing the life you have now. Jung believed that the risk of authenticity is worth it, because the cost of inauthenticity, the decades of dissatisfaction, the health problems, the empty relationships, the unrealized potential, that's a much bigger risk. Here's the practical wisdom. Make decisions thoughtfully. Don't be reckless. Think through consequences. But don't let the fear of being wrong keep you from ever trying. And if you do try something and it doesn't work out, well, you've learned something about yourself. That's not failure. That's data. You're moving forward. This is different from staying stuck because you're scared. One more thing. Remember that your life isn't a single choice. If you change careers and hate it, you can change again. If you leave and regret it, you might reconcile or find something better. Life is dynamic, not a one-time bet. The only irreversible loss is time. And the only way to really waste time is to refuse to live while you're alive. Section 8. Bringing it all together. The final realization. Let's come back to where we started. Carl Jung hit a wall at 40. He had everything society said he should want, and he realized it wasn't his life. That crisis became the most productive period of his life, because he chose to face it. He chose to do the work of individuation. And what emerged from that work transformed not just his life, but the lives of countless people he influenced. Here's what Jung would want you to understand. You're probably living someone else's life. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but you are. The persona you built, maybe it was necessary. Maybe it helped you survive and succeed. But it was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a stage. And somewhere inside you, you know this. That feeling of emptiness? That's not depression. That's your authentic self, knocking on the door, asking to be let in. The path forward isn't easy. It requires facing your shadow. It requires integrating the parts of yourself you've denied. It requires having hard conversations and making scary choices. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is reaching 70 or 80 and realizing you never actually lived. You just existed as a character in a play. Here's what you do now. 1. Make a choice. Decide that from this moment forward, you're going to move toward authenticity. You don't have to know exactly how. Just decide the direction. 2. Start small. Make one choice this week that aligns with your authentic self instead of your persona. It could be small, but make it. 3. Do the work. Whether that's therapy, journaling, meditation, or deep conversations with people you trust. Begin to know yourself. 4. Find your people. Seek out others who are doing this work. Find a community that supports authenticity. Get a therapist if you need one. 5. Be patient with yourself. Individuation isn't overnight. You've spent decades building your persona. It takes time to rebuild your life. But here's the thing. You don't need all the time in the world. You just need to start. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He's right. This work is uncomfortable, but the pain of consciousness is so much better than the numbness of living someone else's life. Don't waste it. The life you're meant to live is waiting. It's inside you, right now, waiting for you to have the courage to claim it. That's the gift of Jung's work. Not comfort, not easy answers, but the possibility of becoming real. And that possibility is available to you right now, in this moment. So what are you going to do? Thank you for spending this time with me. If this video resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. And in the comments below, tell me what's one area of your life where you suspect you're living someone else's dream instead of your own? Let's create a community of people who are committed to actually living. Jung's work isn't easy, but it's real. And you deserve real. I'll see you in the next video.